My name is Brock, and this is the Dungeon Master's Toolkit Podcast. Welcome, everybody. Today I have a bit of a multifaceted episode today. As you know, we are in the middle of a design contest. So the last episode I did is a design contest number 3. The winner of the contest will get a Steam key for Game Master Engine, so sponsored by them. Thank you for providing a Steam key to give away. That's for the full Dungeon Master edition of the game. And for this design competition, like we talked about, we are developing items, people, monsters, locations, whatever, for the location called Emberdeep Mines. So, dwarven mining settlement in a volcano. So, volcanic dwarves, basically. And I thought with this episode that I would go over a couple of items and a couple of poisons that I have come up with to include in kind of as my entries and to give some people some inspiration for whatever they want to submit. And there is no limit on the number of entries you can do, so if you have multiple ideas, feel free to throw them all in. There's really no specific rules for this one. It's kind of homebrew, whatever you want that you think would fit in this area, and we'll go from there. And keeping things fairly system agnostic. The two items that I'm going to be talking about here, I have written as ICRPG or Index Card RPG if you're unfamiliar, because that is the system that my home game is running in, and my players are actually going to be visiting Emberdeep Mines here very shortly. So this kind of works out for me too as a way to get some additional prep done. So thank you guys for helping me out with that. And the other thing that I want to talk about is I got to play in a play test of the MCDM RPG, and there are a few things from there that I kind of want to port over. So part of the inspiration for these items is tugging at some of the mechanics that we see over in the MCDM RPG, and I know we've talked about others that do this as well. So let's get into it. From the MCDM RPG, one of the main mechanics that I have been interested in figuring out how to kind of implement is the kind of removing the D20 roll from, or your reliance on the D20 roll, so that you don't end up with a turn where, you're in a combat or something and you roll poorly 3 or 4 times in a row and you just feel like you wasted like an hour where you didn't get anything done. Because basically the D20 roll comes down to, in a lot of cases, if I roll poorly, then I just basically don't get to take my turn, and I can maybe move somewhere else and maybe position myself, but a lot of times things can get kind of stagnant in that way. And so I want to mitigate that a little bit. And I specifically had a couple of characters that struggled with this in our last session, where they just were not effective at all, despite being the heroes of the story, and that just doesn't feel heroic or fun or anything. But I also don't want to break the game, because Index Card RPG is not built with basically auto hit mechanics in mind. It's a stripped down version of 5th edition almost. The nice thing about the game, and the reason that I'm running it, is that its mechanics are very simple and it's easy to homebrew stuff for the game. And this entire campaign is basically homebrewed with the players. I've got another episode on that where I talked about the world building process that we did. And a lot of the progression in Index Card RPG is tied to your loot or your gear, and less so tied to your abilities. So with introducing magic items, I have a little bit of leeway to directly alter the rules of the game by introducing, items in that act differently or break the rules in certain ways. And so that's kind of what I'm looking at here. The first item will be for our game's rogue character, or the shadow in Index Card RPG. And There's a couple main complaints that this character has had that I kind of want to shore up here a little bit. He is more of a cloak and dagger, kind of a close range melee rogue. So he's in the thick of it, and he ends up kind of aggroing a lot of the enemies because he's moving in and out of people a lot. And he ends up taking a lot of damage because of this, which isn't great for him as a rogue because he's, wearing lighter armor. He doesn't have as much defense. I would say in like a D&D game and a 5e game, his health would be lower. In this case, all of the players have the same amount of health, but ICRPG is also known for having fairly low health that doesn't increase a lot. So so you start with 10, and a lot like basic attacks with weapons deal a d6 plus a modifier. So you're already within like 1 to 2, maybe 3 hits of getting killed. So you have to be careful with this. So one of the first things I did was I did bump up all of the players' health to 20. I think that will help a little bit, at least mitigate some of the squishiness that they're experiencing. It's not a ton of health, and it still means, you can take 1 or 2 good hits and then you're right back to that 10 HP range. And it just gives them basically a little bit of warning of, okay, things are going to get bad quick and I need to be prepared. So this is the first thing I did. All the players, as part of their level up, got an extra 10 health. The next thing I want to do for the rogue and going into this, like, not being able to miss mechanics. So if you're not familiar with the MCDM RPG, they just kickstarted or backer kit, crowdfunded it. They are taking the approach of you don't roll a d20 and then add your modifier and then see if you succeed and then, roll damage for an attack, for example. You just roll damage. So it's like 2d6 is the base. So instead of a d20, you're rolling 2d6 for pretty much everything, and then you're adding some modifier. And you may add additional dice depending on the circumstances, if you have advantages and boons and banes, that sort of thing. So you might get a little bit of extra dice. But your default is that you're going to do something. If you roll really low, if you roll like a 2 and then, have a low modifier, you might only do like 3 or 4 points of damage. And that's kind of considered your miss, right? Some of the enemies have ways of negating a certain amount of damage, like heavy armor that, they ignore, or they reduce all incoming damage by 3 or whatever, right? So you can still have misses in the system. But for the most part, and through the play test that we did, you pretty much are always doing something. There was almost never a point where you didn't do anything. And that felt good as a player. Now, the enemies have the same mechanics as well, so they're also hitting you all of the time. So if an enemy comes up to hit you, you're gonna take damage. You know what's happening. You have some options to mitigate it, again, especially the shadow. I played as the rogue shadow character in this playtest, and they have some really good kind of dodgy abilities that let you reduce damage and get away from enemies so they don't attack you again. And those were a lot of fun to use. You could use them basically every turn, which was nice. There wasn't a ton of resource cost associated with them. The rogue felt like a rogue, like you could do fun rogue stuff. And I liked that, and I didn't ever feel like I was missing a turn because I rolled poorly, which is what my player in kind of the same scenario in ICRPG is experiencing. Now, he's also talked about feeling like he doesn't do a ton of damage. We have a mage in the party, and we have a fighter in the party. Now, the fighter naturally does a lot of damage. She's very good at it. That's what her class is built to do. So she's obviously going to be pumping out the highest numbers. The mage, on the other hand, is not necessarily built specifically to deal a lot of damage. However, in Index Card RPG, the amount of like the damage dice that you roll is based on a specific effort. They call it effort in that. And so it's basic effort would be like if you're using your hands or your mind for a task, but you're not using tools or anything. That's a D4. If you're using mundane weapons, swords, or tools of some kind, that's a D6. Magic, actually we're playing Master Edition, so guns are D8s, and then magic is a D10, and then your D12 is reserved for critical hits. So you add a D12 when you crit. So the mage, just doing purely like a damage-based spell versus the rogue doing a regular like dagger attack, the mage is rolling a D10 versus the rogue's D6. And I think for the most part, they all have kind of the same modifiers in their respective stats. So it's, the rogue is doing a D6 plus 3, and then the mage, who's not specifically trying to do a ton of damage, just happens to be using magic, is doing, a D8 or a D10 plus 3, right? So she's doing a lot more damage, not even intentionally, just because of how effort is set up. And so feels like he's fallen behind a little bit. And part of this is I don't want to specifically just give him more damage, because I don't think that that's necessarily interesting. But when we get into this item, I hope it makes sense that what I'm trying to do here. He does have an ability, actually, that works well with this always do something on your turn mechanics from MCDM. He has I forget what it's called. It's like a shadow. I don't know what the ability is called. It's from his class that he was able to pick this. It's like one of his starting abilities. And that is if he attacks somebody and they can't see him, or they are like unaware of where he is, then his attack can't miss. I have him typically roll just to see if he gets a critical, but otherwise he just straight gets to roll his damage. And that fits perfectly with what I was experiencing with the MCDM RPG. So my thought here is kind of twofold. His first complaint was lack of survivability. He's in the middle of a lot of enemies. He ends up getting beat up on, and that's a problem. He also feels like he's not doing as much damage. One of the last combats that we did, he missed like 3 turns in a row, and it was just felt very bad. So I want to give him an item that kind of as a reaction to getting hit by an attack probably once a round, triggers his invisibility and turns him invisible, either at the cost of kind of spending a reaction or just automatically turns him invisible. And then this would kind of get the 2 pieces, right? It's going to increase his defense, because any other attacks that go against him are going to be harder. The enemies will have disadvantage to hit him, so his survivability should go up. It also means that the next attack he makes is going to not miss. So that should also help with the fact that his damage is a little bit lower. I'm not increasing his damage directly. I'm just making it so that he has a chance to do more damage, because he's not going to be able to miss. And I'm hoping that since I'm playing into, an ability that he already picked, and the roguish archetype in general of being sneaky, I'm hoping that that's just a more interesting solution to the problem than just saying, here, you can have this thing that does more damage, because I don't think that that's interesting. So what I came up with is a kind of a light deflector energy deflection module. One other note about him, he is a steampunk kind of augmented character. And so he's like half man, half machine, right? One of his like racial ability is that he can take items and integrate them into himself, a certain number of them, so he can either conceal them, or he just like always has them ready to be able to use, because they're just part of his body, and he can like take them in and he can swap them with other ones as he wants to. The story reason we're finally getting back to Emberdeep Mines and how this type of item would fit in, and kind of a little role-playing scene, actually. There's a dwarf in Emberdeep named Leah Flameforge, and she is known for her work on the Dwarven automatons, which I'm, for now, calling Mag Hearts, because they are powered by a specialized magma core. But for the most part, they're just big dwarven like mining utility robots, not specifically combat oriented. Her primary job is kind of as a tinkerer, and she works on these on these automatons and a lot of that kind of artificer, magical slash mechanical stuff. And she's been developing an advanced defensive module that's designed to block incoming energy of some kind. And the thought is these are mining automatons that are in a volcano, basically, and they need to be able to resist heat. They need to be able to resist sudden lava bursts, or there's explosive pockets of gas, that can suddenly ignite and, damage or cause cave-ins and that sort of thing. So she's working on this energy deflection module that, in response to getting hit with some immense pressure of some kind, thinking about leaning more towards the energy aspect, the fire, the heat, this thing is going to spin up and try to deflect that energy from hitting them. However, her latest prototype doesn't actually deflect energy per se, or properly. She doesn't have it tuned correctly. So when it gets hit by some force, instead of deflecting the energy of the force, it deflects the light around the wearer, turning them invisible. And this would be a very short term, like until the end of your next turn, you're invisible sort of a thing. It's just a very quick, burst little thing. And the role-playing moment that I'm hoping I can work in when they're inevitably going around town looking to shop and stuff, right, is I want them to come into her forge, her like tinkering area, and have a conversation with her, and I want her to like see him and be like, oh, hey, all of the dwarven automatons, all the Magharts are out working on stuff right now, so I haven't been able to test this. You're a mechanical being. I can install this in you. Can you help me test this thing quick? And then, so hopefully he lets this happen, and I can tell him, out of character, that this is an upgrade thing that you can get from her. And so she'll install it in him, and then they'll test it out in the workshop. And that's when they will find out that, like, oh, he still takes damage, but he turns invisible as part of this. And then, if he can go, help with a quest or whatever for her, then he can keep the module, and she can maybe even make adjustments to the plans. And then when he comes back, she may be able to upgrade it in some way, or upgrade some other gear that they have. I'm hoping that she's a recurring character that can help them upgrade gear. Here is the final description. Flameforge's Light Deflector Module. Crafted by the renowned Leah Flameforge, this advanced defensive module was initially intended to deflect energy from incoming attacks. However, due to a tuning error during its development, was discovered that the device bends and deflects light around the wearer. This sleek, metallic module, adorned with intricate dwarven runes and steam-powered gears, renders the user invisible when attacked. Once per round, when you take damage, you become invisible until the end of your next turn, or until you break the invisibility in some other way. While you are invisible, attacks or abilities targeting you are hard. And that is the Light Deflector module. Hopefully, this works out for my player and solves the problems that he is having without terribly breaking the game. The next character that I want to target with this is the mage character. Now, the mage hasn't had as much problems with misses or dealing, a certain amount of damage, but they have been on the search for some type of an item that would increase their ability to perform magic, to cast spells. And a lot of the spells that she has currently are either fire-based or elemental-based. So fire, water, air, lightning, that sort of thing. Most of them are fire, which fits the theme pretty well here. And I wanted to go with a similar approach to mitigating poor rolls. And so what I came up with was the Forge Caster Gauntlets. So these are heavy dwarven gauntlets that are designed to control and manipulate elements. There's a lot of fire, there's a lot of heat, and the idea, this is something that, as we said, forge caster, so spellcaster, dwarven spellcasters, forge masters, people who were dealing with intense heat would wear these gauntlets. And kind of the idea is the gauntlets protect you when stuff goes wrong. So it's not necessarily enhancing proper usage of spells. It's an attempt to protect and control the volatile elements to at least not damage you in some way. Okay, so let's jump into the description of this one. Forgecaster gauntlets. These heavy gauntlets are made from dwarven steel and etched with arcane runes. These runes are designed to manipulate and control unruly and volatile elements. They are surprisingly flexible and have a faint, constant glow from their enchantments. So the first mechanical piece is elemental control. When you fail to cast an elemental spell, the gauntlets allow you to redirect some of the force of the spell. Choose one. Push the target near, pull the target near, or topple the target. So you can either push them, pull them, or knock them over. So I'm hoping that this gives the spellcaster a little bit of that, like, okay, I failed to damage them with my spell, but I can still push them around the battlefield or pull them around a little bit. And players can get up to some pretty big shenanigans when they're pushing and pulling, moving other creatures around the battlefield. But it's not on a success. So this is the kind of the less than ideal scenario, but at least you get to do something still. And these gauntlets are going to help the mage character just kind of recover some of that lost momentum on a failed roll. The other ability that it gives them is elemental redirection. These gauntlets allow the wearer to easily redirect elemental forces. Any roll to alter, redirect, or protect against elemental spells or effects is easy. So if she's doing some type of a defensive roll, there's a huge burst of fire that's hurtling towards them, and she wants to, try to block it, put up a shield to move the fire out of the way, and in some way manipulate or control something that's beyond, that wasn't caused by her. It's just her roll is going to be easy, so she'll have advantage essentially on any rolls to do that, to defend or protect against elemental effects. So that is the Forgecaster gauntlets, also probably made by Leah Flameforge. This is probably a fairly common item that mages and even just miners in general probably would have. At least one person on their crew would have these gauntlets to deal with elemental effects. And those are the 2 items that I have come up with. As far as the competition goes, I probably could have gone into a little bit longer of a description for each of the items. But for me, the kind of the backstory pieces and how they work with the characters is really what I'm going for in this situation. So use those as inspiration for your own entries. The next piece that I'm going to talk about, the final piece, is a couple of poisons. So the rogue has been on the search for some poisons. He has some abilities that trigger with poison, and he doesn't have any poison, so that has been a problem. So I wanted to introduce a couple of poison options, but again, kind of like his invisibility idea, his items, I don't want to just make poison deal extra damage, because I don't think that is very fun. I want to make things that are interesting and maybe have multiple situational uses so that they can think creatively. So I've come up with a few poisons or elixirs that you would maybe find in Emberdeep mines, and they have effects based on a certain amount of dosage. So I have 1, 2, and 3 doses, and I have different effects for each. So the more you load up on a given character or on your target, it's going to give them slightly different thematic effects. So let's get into the first one. Basalt Blight a gritty black paste made from ground basalt and other minerals mixed with natural toxins. It has a unique property of hardening the skin, but at the cost of mobility. And one dose, target gains 1 point of damage resistance due to a slight hardening of the skin. 2 doses, the target gains 3 points of damage resistance as their skin hardens significantly. However, their speed is reduced by half due to stiffening of their limbs. 3 doses, the target gains 5 points of damage resistance as their skin turns almost stone-like. At this point, the creature can only take an action or a movement. So in like D&D terms, you'd say they basically get to do one thing on their turn instead of an action, a reaction, and a bonus action or a movement. It would just say you get to pick one, basically. And then anything over 3 doses is basically going to petrify the target. And I didn't put in a way to like how this would be resisted. My thought would be that for however many doses they have, probably at the start of each of their turns, they make a Constitution save. And then if they pass the save, then they clear 1 level of dosage, right? So if you were at 3 doses and you successfully made your Constitution save, you would then go down to 2 doses that are still affecting you. So that may be another reason to just, if you want to petrify a target for a really long time, then load up and inject a bunch of doses into somebody. If you have resistance to poison, and I know D&D has a lot of that, the way that I would probably run that is either giving them advantage on the Constitution saves against the effects, or reducing the amount of doses that they take by half. So, for example, if you applied 4 doses to a weapon and you hit somebody with it, but they have resistance to poison, I would probably then only apply 2 doses, an effective 2 doses to them, because they're, just like resisting damage is usually you take half damage. So in this case, you would take half of the poison, essentially, half of the doses. I also like that with this one, the first dose is just 1 point of damage resistance. So you could actually use this on yourself or on allies in a pinch when you need extra, just a little bit of damage resistance. I would still probably go with the same rules for making a Constitution save, because your body is still trying to get this out of its system. So it's maybe a limited use. Also, even this entire thing, at 2 or 3 doses, your movement speed is reduced, or you can only move and not take an action. But if you're going through a hazardous situation where maybe not a combat, but you're trying to go through, especially in the mines, a really hot area where you're going to take damage, or there's stuff happening around you where moving fast isn't necessarily important to you, or moving and doing something else isn't important, like you just need to get through something, you could even dose yourself up and use that kind of limited damage resistance to get through something and kind of like power through a little section before it wears off, before your body fights through it. It could be a neat, it's technically a poison, but it could go either way in terms of usage, which I like. And then we have Dreamweaver Dust, a fine iridescent powder derived from a rare mushroom found in the damp, shadowy corners of the dwarven mines. It causes vivid hallucinations and disorientation. So 1 dose is mild disorientation. The target suffers a minor penalty to perception and decision making. So this would probably be like disadvantage on their next action or decision. You could either have it clear the dose immediately after that happens, or you could have the Constitution save again to clear the doses. 2 doses, strong hallucinations. Target experiences vivid illusions, causing confusion. They may attack random targets, including allies, or act unpredictably. So, I kind of put in quotes here, if they fail a wisdom save, they immediately attack the nearest creature. So this is you want them to you want to aggro or put somebody into a fit of rage and attack. This could be used in both in combat and in potentially social situations where you maybe need a distraction. You need somebody to cause a ruckus and start attacking guards and distract the guards so your thief can sneak into a room or something and grab documents or whatever. And then 3 doses or 3 or higher doses is just complete subdual through overwhelming hallucinations, so they become incapacitated, lost in their own mind. They're they would be out of combat, they would be effectively unconscious, so they would probably be awake, but they're seeing so much stuff that they're just kind of in a daze. But they're not harmed physically, so this poison doesn't do anything to them from a physical standpoint. It's not doing damage to them, but it may take them out of the fight for a little bit, or in the example of you're trying to break in somewhere, you hit a couple guards with this and they're just going to be passed out on the floor for a few minutes, and you can get in and get out and hopefully get away with whatever it is you're trying to do. So hopefully this gives you guys some inspiration for items and some poisons that you could homebrew in your own system and or for the competition. So I'm looking forward to reading some of the submissions that you guys have. Remember, there is a link both in the show notes of this episode, and if you head over to the Discord server, I have all of the links and stuff over there as well. There's a dedicated contest channel, and you can also see some of the previous entries that we've had for our first 2 contests. So if that's interesting to you, or if you want to hop over to the Discord and ask questions or chat with people, feel free to do that, and I will catch you guys in the next episode.